Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We're going to discuss in a little bit of detail the evolving role of the coach within performance analysis. With us on the call, we've got Matthew Joseph, who's a FA youth coach developer. We've got Lydia Bedford. You won't see her, but she is here in the background listening in, who is our current England Women's Under-17 head coach. And we've got Aaron Danks, who is our head of specialist coaching and works within our male national team pathway. Thanks, guys, for joining. I guess we'll just kick straight into the detail. So we're just going to talk a little bit around performance analysis, and in particularly the role you as a coach can play within that process. And for anyone that's heard me speak around this area on courses before will know that I always come back to these couple of questions to start, I guess, getting you guys to think about how the information that analysis can provide can help you in your role. So some things I want you to consider is how or what information can help you as a coach better objectively evaluate the game, your own individual coaching, and give you a better understanding of your team, whether that's as a squad, a team, a unit, or individual players. And I guess it's the latter one of those that we tend to focus our analysis on. We're going to focus on the other two in a little bit more detail. So, Aaron, I'm going to bring you in here because I know you've spoken quite recently on some of our courses about some analysis that you've done around the build the attack phase and how that's sort of impacted and shaped some of the practice design that and some of the practice design and therefore some assessments that you've delivered with your players. You want to give us a little bit of an insight into that?
Yeah, sure. So we talk to the coaches quite a lot about knowing the game, teaching the game and beating the game. So knowledge of the game, understanding the demands of the game is really important to us. However, we had a little bit of a moment catching ourselves where our practice design wasn't necessarily representing the demands of the game. So we would do a lot of practices in the back third of the pitch. So on England teams developing possession from the goalkeeper. And 8 out of 10 restarts were from a goal kick. So we'd spot the ball on a goal kick. We'd give the players some structure, some different types of pressing problems to solve, and then try and find work their way out. The demands of the game aren't that. So the demands of the game are there's only normally 6 or 7 goal kicks a game, depending on the calibre of opposition you're coming up against. So therefore, there was way more transition moments, throw-ins, loose balls, random restarts that we had to factor into our training program. We didn't know that until we analysed and reflected back on our performances and really understood the demands of what we were facing. So yeah, that was a big impact on our coaching.
And I guess, Matty, that's something we do quite regularly on course in terms of studying the game to help develop the practice. Have you got any specific examples of that from your experiences of watching the game and how it might have impacted on your coaching?
Yeah, I think when we work with coaches, and obviously when everyone watches the game, there's a tendency to look at the game based on your own perspective. So sort of a phrase I use with the coaches, it's imperative that we're connected to the game, but not to be hijacked by the game. So obviously using analysis can help you to look at some of the parts of the game that we might have missed when we're looking at specific players or moments in the game or other things. So it just helps us to have a broader look at the game, because obviously the more experience you can become better at observation skills and more things you'll see. But obviously it's just being able to recognise things that happen in the game, how to manage those moments, and will then help the coaches to help the players how to play the game in those moments.
I guess, Lydia, over to you. I mean, I know that you guys have done a lot of work in the women's pathway from analysis of the Women's World Cup. How's some of that work impacting sort of your understanding of the national game, and is that shaping some of the work that you're now doing with the under-17 players?
Yeah, I think so. We've done some really good projects, and we're still in the process of putting together our blueprint for success, which is kind of like our way of playing. And I think some of the data that's come out of those big tournaments has had a real impact. I think particularly in the women's game, like final third football and like goal scoring opportunities are an area that could really be capitalised on. So I think that's had a direct influence on kind of what we're chasing with younger age groups now, and how we're trying to build the attack and work the ball into the final third more successfully.
So, I mean, I guess 3 great experiences there, and I guess an opportunity for those of you that are listening in or watching in to start thinking about, what does a game look like in your environment, and as a result of that, in the different phases, what does practice look like, and do your practices are they reflective of the game? So that'll be, I guess, one of the areas we're gonna speak around. We're going to go to a little bit more depth in a moment around evaluating yourself and your own coaching. And I guess ultimately as coaches, we're all just trying to help players be the best they can be. So we've got an element of how do we use this information to help us as coaches, but also then how do we filter some of that information to help our players? And we're going to go on to a little bit of, I guess, in depth of what that might look like in terms of what work we might be able to do away from the field with our players. But I think that's just a key point to make, is just because we're in a world where there's so much information, so we've got a real responsibility of filtering that information and delivering clear, insightful messages with clarity to the player. So again, I'll come to you, Lydia, in terms of, I imagine, in your role, the analysts you've got working with you, there's lots of feedback through the video data you get, but I guess not all of that goes to the player. So what's the role that you and your analysts play in terms of filtering that information?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's loads of information that you could possibly pass to the players, but I think it's about working out what the real key bits are that are going to influence and maybe impact the next moment. So for us in a tournament, if Jordan, our analyst at 17s, has turned around a whole set of metrics and data from game one, actually in the moment, in the 2-day turnaround between that and the next game, it might be that we know there's an element of our play that's going to be really important in the next game. And if there's some of that data that we can use to highlight to the girls the importance of focusing on it in the next game, we might share that. But I think when you've got real short times with the players, it's about being really selective about what's actually relevant. I think otherwise it could be overkill in terms of the amount of information you're trying to present to them. So it's got to be specific to what we're actually going after. And it's, when you see loads of data, it's quite easy to get swayed by other things, but it's about what the focus of the tournament was and keeping it in line with that.
Yes, it comes down to, I guess, clarity of message, the right information for the right player or group of players at the right time, depending on the specific moment you're in with them, and being flexible and adaptable. Aaron, have you got any examples from your world around that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so much data and so much information now. We will look at opposition. I know we'll come on to this a little bit later, but we'll look at the opposition's last 6 to 8 games as coaches, produce lots of detail, and the analysts will be doing similar stuff in terms of measurements and data and metrics. It's filtering that down into the most simple, clear messages that you want to show the players. And I think that's the art of it. I think it's a real exciting area to explore. It's a real exciting part of your toolkit to have as a coach. But sticking to that clarity and having that message discipline and being succinct with your details is vital.
I mean, like I say, ultimately, as coaches, we're all here to help the players be the best that they can be. So, around this area, around, I guess anything in general is to keep asking yourself, is this going to help me as a coach, help my players get better? And I guess that's some of the questions that I want you guys watching to keep at the forefront as we sort of work through the next half hour, 40 minutes or so. So one of the areas we're going to focus in a little bit more detail is around actually using analysis to focus on yourself as a coach. So I guess getting into my head a little bit, I often sort of ponder. We do a lot of work in analysis where we're working directly with the players, and particularly more so in a development setting as opposed to performance setting. If we actually focus, some portion of our time actually working with the coach to help the coach develop their skill set and be the best that they can be, will that ultimately possibly have more of an impact with the players than just the work that we might be focusing on evaluating the players' performance? Matty, I don't know what you think of that. That's just something that keeps me lying in bed awake at night.
Yeah, I think as you just mentioned, that self-reflection is really important. Using analysis to look at either yourself or the players of the game are really good tools to keep players connected to their own development and their learning. But certainly for ourselves, if we start to look at the things that start to inform our coaching behaviour, because generally as a coach on the side of a pitch, whether it's training or whether it's a game, we can reference and we can look at the opposition coaches of other coaches, and we'll form an opinion of how impactful they may or may not have been. But we don't always get that immediate feedback, apart from if the players give us their thoughts and processes. So to be able to look at yourself and then think, right, what are the things that have informed my behaviour? What sort of things keep me connected to the game and keep me in a position where I can help the players develop? So I think that's really important to understand what sort of things push your buttons, as it were, which sort of things that will annoy you, that might cause you to lose focus, because every opportunity we have with the players is a perfect opportunity to try and support them and develop them. So we're trying to look at that stuff around self and how we can use analysis to look at us and then reflect back and say, well, in that moment, why did I do what I did? And then being able to look back and think, right, well, when this happened or when this moment was approaching, I can see how my behaviour might impact upon the players who I'm working with. And that's really important, because it's all that non-verbal communication, but also some of the stuff that starts to, if we start to get uptight and anxious about certain things that are happening in the game, whether it's the score, whether it's a decision, whether it's an opposition, whether it's the fans, whatever it is, we can sometimes lose, I think Danks mentioned it earlier, we can sometimes lose that message discipline and then become a little bit unfocused. So the first thing we sort of speak to about with our coaches when we're working with them is this: it's just to video them and then just say, look, give us your feedback on what you saw and why do you think those sort of things happen. And it's really quite a powerful tool for coaches to look at.
And I guess just to follow in on that, in your role as a coach developer, how valuable has it been for you as an individual to have developed the skill set yourself to be able to help capture that content themselves, to be able to work with the video, and whether that's sharing the video as a whole back with a coach or cutting it or tagging it, whatever terminology you want to use to cut up, certain aspects of that session to help with that feedback process.
I think the good thing about it is that it cuts away all of the other stuff that might sort of inform a decision. So if you're using analysis, it takes away context, which in some ways is good, in some ways isn't so great. But what it does, it allows the coach to look at their behaviour specifically and think about how their coaching behaviour is helps the players. And that's not saying that coaching behaviour is negative, but ultimately, like we said before, we're here to develop the players. So any moment that we're not 100% focused or on developing the players is a moment which is missed.
I guess, Danks, I'll come over to you in terms of, what's the work that you do around with players on the men's national team camps that I guess your sessions and how you reflect on your sessions and yourselves as coaches in particular, how does what's that process look like for you as an individual, but then also as your coach within your coaching context?
Yeah, for me,
we've lost Danksy. Is it just you and me, Matty?
I think it might be. Well, kind of just to continue on, I'm not sure if Danksy was coming to this point as well, but just to continue with that coaching analysis, it gives us as coaches, an opportunity to start thinking about before, during, and after an action or a moment. So before something happens, when we can see those things are happening, or we get that feeling that those things might be happening, it gives us an opportunity to think of what do we do in those moments? Have we recognised them? Have we seen them? Do we know that they're about to happen? And if we have missed that, or we've managed that in an appropriate way, or the way that we think is best, then obviously we can then start to focus on during that moment when the players do have the ball, or in that moment in the game where something is happening. Again, it's really hard to keep an eye on everything which is going on in the game, certainly on and around and away from the ball, and just being able to have a look back and see a broader perspective and the bigger picture gives us a great opportunity. Then the next time these things happen or they occur, it gives us a chance to look out for them. So there's that thing about, I suppose, what lens are you looking through when we're looking at a game? And lots of times we can get caught up in looking for something specific rather than just looking at the game. And it's a real different, it's a small differential, but has a real big impact on the game and how we can support our players.
And I guess, Danksy, I don't know how much of the question I asked you previously got. I think you were just about to launch into a response where we lost you. So do you want to go back on it, or are you okay? Do you want to come back?
Yeah, no, all I was going to say really, really simply, for me, coach development is player development. So if we want to get better at developing our players, we've got to know what we need to improve as coaches ourselves. And that's something I think we can get really excited and even really competitive about. Is, come on, how are we getting this feedback and reviewing ourselves and reflecting on our own performance to improve the players?
So what does that, Aaron, what does that look like in your world in terms of, a training session that you deliver with your players? How do you review that, and how do you utilize, I guess, analysis tools I say process the video is probably not the right terminology, but how do you make use of the analysis tools within that reflection process?
Yeah, I mean, so we're lucky that we have every training session recorded, and then we'll use that to feedback to the players, review the session, but also then we can use it to review ourselves. And I think the big thing that we're noticing is the more detail we get into, the more we understand the game, the more we know the depths of the game and the different layers that are going on within every session. We can't see everything as coaches. We can't capture everything as coaches. So if we know our intent, what we're really going after in the session, what our objectives are, we'll review back to look at, well, actually, was I in the right place to see that? Did I intervene at the right moment? Did I talk for too long? Did I not allow that situation to manifest enough in the session? So we're constantly reviewing back the practice and giving the players feedback. But it's important that we're also really critical of ourselves and really look at ourselves to go, well, how much did we notice? What did we notice? And when? And then that wouldn't just be me as an individual. That would be the pack of coaches. So the group of coaches working within that one session, us all reviewing back at how well we worked together, how well we supported each other, and how much value we added to each exercise.
And Lydia, is that a similar process that you follow within the women's pathway in terms of your reviewing of practices, both of yourself and of the players? You with us, Lids?
Gremlins today, I think.
We'll move on. I'm hopefully she'll be back joining us in a moment. I guess, Matty, anything else you want to add around that in terms of, I guess, jumping on the back of what Danksy said there?
Yeah, I think what Danksy said there about the reviewing part is really important. And if we looked at that whole sort of model, if you like, in terms of plan, doing, reviewing, analysis is the stuff that helps to connect those three things together, because you can use analysis prior to something going on or in part of your planning. Like Danksy said, you can't see everything in the game or in the session, but if you know what your intent is, you can look back and say, right, well, based on what you've delivered or what you've had a look at, was the intent clear enough to the players? Because if it wasn't, it gives us an opportunity to plan again better next time. Obviously, as you're going through that practice, it's an opportunity using analysis to really have a more in-depth look at what the players are doing. And then obviously afterwards, as Danksy said previously, we can then start to review, and we can review our performance and we can review the players' performance, and then start to make the alignment between the two.
Lydia, you're back with us?
I hope so.
Yes. Yay, we've got you. Do you want to jump back on the question I just asked you there?
Yeah, so very similar to what Danksy spoke about. We'll obviously use all of our training sessions are filmed, and we'll use that footage to run reviews of the players. It comes back to the point we made earlier around trying to make sure that's really specific. So if we've had some clear outcomes for training, trying to stick to those when we're then going through the review process, so we don't kind of drift too much into other areas. But yeah, that's really important. And we use the analysis pre-training as well, because we often layer the session brief with some footage of either a previous game or training session, which might help to bring to life the training experience too. So yeah, like it's a bit of a before and after. And then in terms of the coaches, we obviously use it to be able to watch back our own kind of coaching performance. We can be mic'd up whenever we wish to be. But I think one of the most useful things, I think Danksy kind of referred to it, is like the ball rolling time. So when the analysts pull off the timeline in the training, you can really see how much we've allowed the players to kind of learn from their experience of playing versus how many times we've intervened and start to unpick with the use of the mic, whether that was kind of worthwhile or not. And we've also done similar on a match day, which I think Matty spoke about earlier, where we've like put an iPad and recorded the touchline during the match. And again, you can go back and think about what you've said and what the purpose of that language was. So I think all of those types of things are really helpful to develop yourself as a coach.
I guess just jumping on what you said there about, reflecting against the framework, so reflecting against the intended outcomes of your session, and I think that's a really good take-home message for everyone watching, is to be specific about what are the outcomes of your session. And it might be a simple question in your review and reflection process: is have you met those outcomes with the players? And that can then help you identify what extra work you might want to do for those players, whether it's in the next on-field session or whether that's in some supplementary work that you might do away from the field of play, and which is what we'll go on to talk about in a little bit in a moment. But yeah, I guess some really, really good insight and some really good, I think, take-home messages there for people that are starting to think about how they might reflect and look upon themselves, how they might review training, not just for looking at how the players did, but also reflecting on yourself as the coach. And I like the quote there, Danksy, that I'm gonna definitely steal. Is it coach development is player development, or player development is coach development, and it's it's all intertwined, it's all wrapped up in the same thing, as opposed to two separate entities. I guess move us on quite nicely just to go into a little bit more in depth, specifically around with Aaron and Lydia about their roles, but I guess how they've had to evolve as coaches around their application and use of analysis tools and technologies to help you in your role. So I'll come to you first, Aaron, in terms of what does, say, like your opposition process look like, and what's your role within in studying your opposition, and the role of the analyst in that process?
Yeah, so I think it's a really exciting area for the modern day coach, and I say modern day coach lightly because I know coaches through the generations have had a multitude of disciplines to the role. So they've been teachers, they've been carers, they've been confidence at time. That like the role of coaching is so broad. I think it's more pertinent in the current day because of the technology we have available to us, but also what our young players are comfortable consuming. So they now grow up on iPads and they grow up with technology, and they can interact with it really quickly. So it's something that we've tried to use with all our national coaches, upskill all our national coaches so they are computer literate. They can tag and code and clip and take content from footage themselves now. So all of our analysts, all of our coaches would be analysts, have the ability to deconstruct a training session or take parts out of a match review for the players. So that whole process starts, like you said, with the opposition analysis. So it would be our coach's role. So our head coach and our two specialist coaches, one would have an in-possession focus, the other would have an out-of-possession focus. They would take on the role of looking at the opposition and looking for their traits and their trends. So me as an in-possession coach, I would look purely at how they defend. So how are they going to press us? How will they defend the middle third of the pitch? What will they look like when they're defending their goal in a low block situation? Out of possession coach will look at the opposite. So we'll look at how they're going to attack. So how will they build from their goalkeeper? What will they try and do for the middle third of the pitch? And how will they look to create and score goals in the final third? And we all come back together then as a group of staff to share that content, to check and challenge each other. What have we noticed? What are we seeing? And then our analyst in the background of all that is freed up to do some other work. So he could be looking at a bit more data and measurement and getting some statistics behind their performances. He might be looking back at the manager's profile, the referee that we're coming up against. So he could be looking at lots of different areas, and again, challenging or confirming some of the stuff that we've seen as coaches. Once we've gone through that stage, the process then is filtering that down to say, what do we want to show the players? We don't want to give the players all the answers straight away. So we might give them a shortened version of what the content that we've seen and ask them to go away and look at it. And that might be a couple of days before they come on camp, or it might be when they arrive on camp, some tasks for them to do on iPads in their rooms. Or
I guess, Aaron, just focusing on that process in a bit more depth. as a coach, so I reflect often on some of the work that I used to do with our national teams, going back a few years where, I wasn't necessarily working with coaches that had some of the skill sets that you guys have got now. And therefore, as an analyst, I would be doing a lot of that, reviewing the opposition, creating some, the video profile, and probably then sitting down with the coach and talking through some of the detail around that. What benefit do you think being much more involved in that process yourself brings to I guess, your understanding of a future opponent, or, your own game if you're reflecting on that? And therefore, how does that, I guess, then help the work that you do with the players on the pitch?
Yeah, I think it helps. It helps. It's another tool for your toolkit, really. So it helps me in terms of visualize some of my messages quicker. So if I've got a message that I want to give the players around, this is what I'm expecting the opposition will do, or this is something that I think one of our principles that we need to be really good at. I can get to that content quite quickly now, and visualize it and come up with short video clips that I can be pinging around on WhatsApp, or I can be pulling a player to one side and showing them, or I can be doing a classroom presentation. So it's definitely, it allows me to share with the players and coach the players. But also for me as a coach, it's given me a really good resource and a really good toolkit for myself. So if I want to really get into a technical detail, or really look at tactical trends or something that's going in the game, I can use these tools to grow myself as a coach as well. I can use these tools to really explore, and in particular the time that we're currently going through, where we haven't got access to camps and players, using the time to look at different tactical trends, looking at different things that are going on in the game, and it's a real good tool for us to use.
And Lydia, I know I work with some of our female national squads. I'm going to show my age, going back probably 13, 14 years ago. I used to work with Mo Marley when she was the under-19 head coach. And even back then, Mo was so hands-on with the analysis tools and technologies. And I guess particularly in the female game, where there maybe wasn't as much resource around it, as coaches, sometimes you didn't have an analyst. And I know we've had this conversation previously. So how has it helped you as a coach in terms of being able to develop some of those skill sets so you can utilize the analysis technology yourself?
Yeah, so I think obviously maybe not 13 years worth of experience, but I think I've been in the pathway for about 6 or 7 years now. And when I first came in and assisted, some of the head coaches like Mo, Lois, John Griffiths, when he first started, it was a real speedy learning curve for me in terms of being able to pick up the use of sports code. And as the analyst, you often kind of got given the role of reviewing the game and trying to get it turned around and ready for some sort of player presentation by kind of the morning after. So I can picture that environment now, and if I'm honest, it's probably influenced as a head coach now how I've tried to divide the roles and upskill as many people as possible, because I feel really grateful for the experience I had in terms of how quickly I had to learn those skills to be able to use them. But now I really see also the value in being able to divide up some of those tasks and balance out a little bit of that workload, because as you said, Mo is really hands-on, but then if Mo's hands-on in every aspect of camp, then Mo's quite quickly burning out. So as the head coach now, I'm really trying to utilise the different people. So this year at 17s, I've been really lucky. I've got a full-time analyst, Jordan, and then I've had 2 assistant coaches. So what that's really looked like for us in tournaments would be pre-tournament, Jordan and I would obviously work on any kind of footage we did have of the 3 opponents coming up. So we might start to build some brief opposition profiles. They're probably not that detailed in the sense that sometimes we can only access 1 or 2 games, but it's a starting point. And that probably allows us to pull together, like Danksy said, like a small version for that first opponent that the girls can kind of digest before coming into the camp. But then when we actually get into the thick of it, and for me, that really starts just after game 1, when everything goes a bit crazy and suddenly, you've had a month's worth of planning for game 1 and you've got 48 hours of planning for game 2. And you can do obviously some of that in advance. But for us, nothing beats seeing the opponent live when you're in that tournament environment. So when we went to Bosnia in October, it was a case of play the first game in the morning and straight off to go and watch the other 2 opponents play that afternoon. And then from that point onwards, that's when our role division really works well. So as the head coach, I picked up the second opponent and I kind of worked over the 48 hours to make sure we had an opposition profile pulled together for that. one of my assistant coaches watched that game focusing on the third opponent, and he started to pull together the opposition profile based on that. And then the other assistant was based more with the players and pulled together the review work for the players to be able to unpick our first game and think about what was important for the next one. So that allowed Jordan, the analyst, to actually, as Danks, he kind of spoke about, focus on the metrics and some of the data that he really needs to turn around. And I think it gives everyone an opportunity to feel part of it, but it upskills everybody in terms of their use of the technology. And I think it also means that with that eye that everyone's got, you've got multiple opinions. And as a head coach, it's really valuable knowing that kind of I can rely on the staff to be able to pick that up and run with it and trust them that, they're not going to be leaning on Jordan loads to use that technology. So, yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question or not, but I think it's really valuable being upskilled in that and being able to use as many people in the process as possible.
And I know you've done answered that really well and done a really nice summary. And I think I reflect back to some of my own experiences and how different it is now. And it's essentially, by dividing out the process of creating the content, it actually means you can start utilizing it and therefore impacting the work of the players earlier in the process. So, again, based on my own reflections, when you've got like a 2-day turnaround between games, often that first day after a game is around reviewing that game and focusing on creating the content to review the players. And then you move on to start looking at the next opponent. By having more people that can be involved in the process, those processes are happening simultaneously. So you can start working with that opposition analysis a lot earlier. And then that, I guess, becomes a little bit of your competitive advantage because you've got the insight and the objective insight you need earlier in the process. And therefore, the work that you can do with your players is more tailored with that.
Yeah, I think as well, you start to get some of those like subliminal messages in that the players don't even realise you're giving them. So for us in that tournament, our third opponent that I gave over to the assistant coach was actually on paper the strongest one. But I knew then from pretty much 3 hours after game one, he was really focused on that. And it meant when we were talking about training ahead of game two, where we could actually start to weave in some of the things that were going to be important in game three. So rather than only having 2 days to prepare for the strongest opponent, we actually had 5. So it was a better use of our time overall.
And Matty, I guess comes to you in terms of, we work and we have a lot of coaches on our course that are, all come from different backgrounds and have different elements of resource available. I guess when, Danksy and Lydia are working in squads where we've got analysts, we've got coaches that can help part of the process, but that's probably quite a unique environment. And therefore, I guess, if you don't have an analyst, your role and responsibility around skill sets in the area becomes, I guess, even more important because it is still something you can maximise and make use of, as opposed to thinking, well, I've not got an analyst, so I can't do any analysis. Would that be right?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think it's more around the process of analysis rather than the amount of resources that you've got available. And to use Danksy's phrase, a modern day coach has got loads of resources available to them in terms of technology that they just have even on a handheld phone. So just to record some data or some information and then to review that, it's still analysis, and it's just a case of really deciding what it is you want to find out from the amount of information and data and being clear on how you might be able to record that, or what metrics you want to use to record that, or what it is you're trying to find out. So yes, there is a big disparity of some of the clubs and some of the coaches of what some coaches may have accessible to them to use. But using basic models of analysis can definitely help you as a coach to reflect and to plan and to become better, and can certainly help your players to become better as well.
I mean, yeah, I guess we all these days, and have done for a few years now, we've all got the capabilities of recording content from the phone that sits in our pocket or that's attached to the end of our arm pretty much frequently throughout the day, in my case particularly. So I guess, yeah, we're moving away from the world where, analysis was a nice to have. It's now something that really is accessible to everyone, and particularly with, the array of tools and technologies that are available. Many, some of them actually don't cost anything. So you have, basic video editing software on most of your tablets or your computers these days. I know a lot of our coach developers just use iMovie to help sort of cut and create some video presentations and resources, as well as obviously the more sophisticated analysis. So it really is an area now that can be utilized by everyone. and especially coaches, which is, I guess really important in the point of some of the discussions that we're having. I guess then just moving on in terms of what some of that work with our players might look like. So, there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so much time we can spend on the grass with our players. And I guess it's then looking about how we can maximize some of that time away from the grass. So I must admit, if you hear me speak on course, I have a big issue with the word meeting. I don't think when someone says meeting, it has fantastic connotations and it makes you think of something that might be really positive and enjoyable. So, I guess the phrase that I use around this area is it's coaching, but it's just off the field. So we do coaching on the grass and we do coaching away from the grass. And those sessions that, whether you call them meetings or where you call them analysis sessions, it's just another coaching session. It's another opportunity for us as coaches to help the players get a little bit better. And I guess we're just going to spend sort of 5 or 10 minutes now just talking around some of the details of what some of those sessions might look like. So I don't know, Aaron, do you want to give us an example first up of maybe some of the work that you've done with players off the field of play, which has helped their performance on the pitch?
Yeah, certainly. It's like you said, it's so important for us. In our lens of international football, we would have a 10-day camp where you may play 2 or 3 games. You've got a quick turnaround of games, and you've got your training hours in the day. So you might be on the grass for an hour, hour and a half. So what we tend to, the phrase that we use a lot is the other 22 hours. So as a multidisciplinary team, we always think about the other 22 hours. What does it mean? What are we doing? What are we working on? So obviously things like rest, recovery, nutrition, all that are really important to the other 22 hours. But part of it for us is coaching. So when else can we coach? What are our other moments to coach? It might be as simple as, I remember one of the analysts talking to me about honey traps. He just said, like, where do you notice the players are spending their time? Where do you notice that they're congregating? So it was coffee machines. It was the games room. It was on the way into the dining room for lunch and evening meals. So brilliant. Use those as honey traps. So we'd set up like little iPad stations, or I'd be sat there with just going through, pretending I'm doing some work. But then as a player walks past it, just grab them and come and have a look at this. And so it's constantly those little coaching moments, really informal, like you say, not putting it down on a piece of paper as a meeting, not putting it down as a task. It was just little moments just to capture people and share some little clips with them. It's been really good. And then on top of that, then there's been more formal stuff. So there's been more of the classroom-based work. We did one piece of work with some of the players around creating goal-scoring chances, finishing goal-scoring chances. And we used like a 1 to 9 scale of a 9 would be a real achievable goal-scoring chance and a 1 would be a real difficult chance. So we put some video clips up of some goals and we spoke through where we'd put them on the scale. But what that then became was a little tool that we could use after game. So we'd put then up all our chances up in the classroom after the game. These are our shots that we had, and the players would then take over the meeting saying, "Oh, I thought that was a 7. Like that's quite a good chance." Somebody else goes, "Nah, it's not. That's a 5. Why do you think it's a 5?" He's under quite a lot of pressure there, or there's quite a lot of players between the shot and the goal, so it's a real difficult finish. So the players are coaching each other, using video clips, using a little bit of a toolkit around language and a little scale of goal scoring chances. Just dead simple, but straight away, like the learning that's going on and the thought process around decision making on what's a good shot to take, what's not a good shot to take, and the peer-to-peer coaching is really, really valuable. So that would just be an example of a way that we'd use it in the classroom, again, reflecting, but trying to impact the work that we're doing on the grass.
And I guess it's, one of the things that I often think and reflect about, particularly around these sessions, is not just sort of the technical and tactical. So clearly, that's probably at the heart of everything we do. But if we think about, some of the skills that players are going to need in order to be successful in the game, when they cross that white line, they're the ones that are playing the game. And it's not just about the technical and tactical. You think you're going to have to be effective communicators, make the right decisions at the right time. And I guess if we start sort of listing all the skills that players will need, there's a wealth of opportunity to help develop those skills around around what we can do off the field as well as on the field. And I guess, Lydia, we've got, a picture on the screen of the Sabutio board, and that's been a great asset for us in coach education. And I know certainly some of the work that you guys do off the field. Do you want to maybe give us an example of how you might utilize that with some of your off-field work?
Yeah, so I think, like, similar to Danks, obviously you're trying to get a balance of informal and formal moments to help support the players. One thing I'm really conscious of when I'm thinking about the schedules for those 10-day camps is actually giving the girls some, like, what we call, like, white time, as in there's nothing in the schedule, and that's particularly important. So I think some examples of some of the bits that aren't necessarily driven around tet-tat that we would do with them but still would be really valuable would be, so like if they've played the game the next day, they've turned everything around, we've reviewed it by lunchtime, we've given them the afternoon off, or they've had the majority of the day off, we tend to put in like a 15-minute reconnect just to kind of bring them back to the reality that we're 48 hours now or 24 hours away from the next game. So that might be using analysis without it really being tech-tac. So when we were away in Bosnia, one of those sessions was actually to share with them some clips that we'd managed to get of the crowd watching Bosnia play as the host nation, and the behaviours of the coach and some of the gamesmanship of the players. And it was just a quick 10-15 minute video to go, right, these could be some things you face when you step onto the pitch that aren't necessarily tet-tat but are going to have an influence. I think another example, we do a lot of stuff around the what ifs, because I think, as you said, we can give them a kind of like a guide as to how we're playing, but they need to be able to make decisions in the game. So what scenarios can we help them with? And I think the Sabutio boards are excellent for that in terms of player interaction and getting them to really discuss and work with each other to find solutions. We actually, on the women's side, we're not necessarily blessed with multiple Sabutio sets. So we've gone a bit old school this season, and every time we've had a 17s camp, we've just used masking tape and magnets. And we normally set up a life-size pitch, which is probably, it's big enough for all 20 players to be sat around on the floor and big enough for me to walk around in the middle and like move magnets. And then we have 3 little ones that we masking tape around the outside of the room, which we use for units. So it's just a kind of different way of trying to get the information across to them. But yeah, I think there's a couple of examples there of ways we'd work with them, and I think how interactive we make those sessions and how much involvement the players have is really important.
I'm just on the back of what you said there, I'm just going to jump on a couple, because I think this slide that Tom Curtis, one of the national team specialist coaches, has put together, sort of consolidates really what you've just said in terms of there's lots of opportunities if we think a little bit differently or sometimes a little bit outside the box to interact with the players. And you referred there to almost like the mini pitch with the tape on the floor, and I can remember doing sort of set play sessions by marking out the 18-yard box, the 6-yard box, the final third, and using diffs in cones in an interactive environment, and having that interactive discussion with players in terms of their roles and responsibilities. And sometimes that's not often a delivery information. It can often be used as a sort of a check and challenge. So have the players understood some of the information that we've, I guess, as coaches or analysts, been trying to share with them or help them understand. And it's a useful way of, I guess, those problem solving type scenarios to check and challenge whether they've taken on board that information. I guess, Matthew, any examples from coach education or your work with different coaches and clubs that you want to bring to the table around that?
I think they're both really, really good examples that Lids and Danks have spoken about. But if we're thinking about the off-field coaching, it's really important for us to remember how players learn. Not every footballer is a kinesthetic learner. And so sometimes being able to look at a pitch without the ball rolling, sometimes being able to have those discussions or, look at stuff that's on the board, that's a really, really good opportunity for our players to learn and connect, and then think about how they'll put it into practice when they do get on the grass. Again, I think the guys have both spoken about, if we're going to use the analysis, whether we're using mini pitches or animation or whatever, it's being really clear on what's essential for the players to learn right now, what's required and what's desired. So if there's something that we can have a real big hit right now and be most impactful, it's a great opportunity to use it. What it also might give us is an opportunity to think about, well, what's required for us to get better at? And it might be, well, what's required for them, what's required for us, and what's required for, to connect those two together. So we can really start to look at, if I'm an individual player, if Danksy Liz and I are all in the same team we were playing, I might look at it from the point of view, the game as a point of view from a defender, say a right back. Danks is playing in front of me. When we start to move those your speed players around, he might put himself in a different position than I would do. And I'm thinking, well, I would want you here. And he's thinking that he needs to be somewhere else. Liz is thinking, well, she want to be somewhere else. And all of a sudden, you can start to connect the learning, thinking, right, the types of players that I'm playing with are going to dictate how I might need to play. But then I might play with someone else who's got completely different attributes and skills. So I'm still going to play the same game, but I might then have to consider where I might need to be and what that position might look like with other people around. So using the mini pitch is a really, really good example to help the players, or using the magnets just so we can start to move stuff around and do some live analysis with the players so they can start to really connect themselves to the game, where they might be on the pitch and how that might affect the players in and around them.
And I guess, Aaron, that's probably really pertinent, and Lydia as well, in the international environment, because you're bringing players in that aren't familiar with playing with each other every week, and you're trying to, develop and establish those relationships and that connectivity with the players.
Yeah, that really, really resonates with some recent conversations that we've been having around. We've had a few guest speakers in, a few ex-professional players, and they've all spoke so well about the connections that they had on the pitch, connections with certain individuals. So we're thinking quite strongly now about how do we recreate that in international environment where you are bringing people in from different clubs that have got different styles and habits and trends. And it might be things like actually not just looking at your own clips. It might be looking at the clips of somebody else. It might be looking at somebody else's clips. It might be doing some of those interactive sessions that Matt has just described really well, where you're starting to talk about, well, actually, when you get the ball in that moment, these are the movements that I'm going to make. Let's look out for me doing this. Look out for these my little triggers. And the better we can build those relationships in different ways, I think it will really have a good impact, a positive impact on the pitch.
I think I'm just going to jump back to the one we missed around. We were speaking around that environment and creating that environment. I know, Lydia, this is one that we had quite a conversation around before this session, in terms of, I guess it's in my experience to see, coaches spend a lot of time planning, preparing for those on-pitch sessions. And, the off-field sessions maybe don't necessarily get the same level of detail and planning attached to them. But actually it's, I guess I reflect on some of my work that I've done this area, and a lot of the focus was on the content and, getting the right clips without actually thinking what's the outcome we're looking for. And as a result of that outcome, that'll dictate what the content might look like and what the environment we might create in order to allow that outcome to be reached. And Danks, you've already mentioned sort of like the coffee machine conversations, and actually some purposeful planning around trying to create that moment with the player, which is quite informal. Lydia, do you want to give us some insight into how you might create the environment from an off-field point of view with your players?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's something I'm pretty passionate about. I think it's the teaching background potentially, but as you said, it's easy to not necessarily give it the attention it maybe deserves in terms of what the environment looks like and how it's going to have an influence on the players' interaction. But I think it's so important. So I think the first thing I'd say is probably thinking about what resources you can use, much of which we've kind of already spoken about to bring it to life. And I know Matty said about the types of learners. So whether that's, the masking tape or a Sabutio board, or whether that's something visual that they can go and look at on an iPad, it's trying to find different resources that kind of allow them to engage. I think another stage is probably just making sure on a basic level that the room set up really allows everyone to engage. So I'm not sure if it's the same Danks with you guys, but often in our meeting rooms on the women's side, you'll see like a horseshoe type setup, mainly because we want everybody to be able to have a clear view of the screen, and it allows you to really easily to be able to get interaction across the room between players. I was just thinking when both Matty and Danksy were speaking about like sharing what player connections look like. We do something which has grown quite powerfully this year, the 17s, where the last meeting before we go for a game, they have to sit there and say, right, this is what I'm going to bring for the team today, but this is what I need from you. So I might turn around to Danks and be like, what I need from you today is to trust me, to give me the ball to feet, because you're the centre back and I'm the holding midfielder, and I'm going to be asking for it every time. So those types of room setups allow that interaction. I think we've probably alluded to it, especially when Danks spoke about catching players off guard for kind of short moments that they might not expect. But I think the length of time that we spend with players in a meeting room is so important. I mean, Laura, you said you did it 14 years ago with Mo. I'm sure you can probably think back to some of the lengths of meetings. I know when I first came into the setup, probably an hour in the meeting room was a fairly average amount of time, whereas I think the data and the evidence really shows that our concentration levels are probably anywhere between 9-10 minutes and 20-25 minutes at a push. And I think everyone's tested on that in lockdown right now with these types of things. So trying to get the players in and out of an environment quickly, but still making it engaging to them is important. So we're trying to aim for kind of meetings that don't last more than 20 minutes unless they're really player engaging, i.e. the players are breaking off and they can go and leave the room and look at some clips and they're coming back in. And then I think the balance of being in the meeting room versus finding some little breakout spaces to go and work in allows you to perhaps keep their concentration for a little bit longer. And then I think the last two really that I think have been really valuable in terms of my learning this season and what we've tried to do with the players would be dual coding, which is something, Danks, I'm sure you probably heard it 1,000 times mentioned on the pro license. But it's something which is so simple in terms of trying to make sure that when we're delivering with players, you're not just giving them a visual, you're matching that up with verbal or some written kind of cue that they can associate it with. So if I think back to when the kids I work with now are under 15s, it used to be like a really open question at the bottom of the clip. So immediately they know what you're kind of asking them to kind of consider. I think if you're really whizzy with technology, it can be all the arrows and circles and lines that you can use to demonstrate what we're looking at. And then I think the final thing, and again, it's kind of been mentioned already, but it's what I'd call space repetition. So trying to give them chunks of information over a period of time. So if we've only got them for 10 days, if you have one meeting on the game plan, it's going to be probably in and out of their heads pretty quickly. Whereas if you can layer and drop that in over a period of 2 or 3 days with some short spaced out meetings, then there's more chance of that being kind of held onto. And as part of that, I think it's really important that when we're sharing footage with players, I'm quite passionate about the fact that they don't just see it for the first time when they walk into the meeting room. I think it's really important that they've had an opportunity to digest it. I know Dank said about sharing it pre-camp. And we often use that big tactics board that I spoke about at the start of the room. If we're doing a meeting which is to talk about the next opponent, the first thing the girls will expect when they now walk in is that I would have just left the magnets on the floor. And the first 2 minutes is set me up what put out what the opponent's shape's likely to be. And then let's talk about what the strengths and weaknesses are and how we can exploit that opponent. So, yeah, you're just trying to, I guess, engage them as much in the process. And the more player-led I think it can be, the better.
I think you've spoken really well, Lydia, and you've made some excellent points there. I definitely challenged the whole, we can only do meetings for 10, 15 minutes. We need to get the players in and out, because I really think that does depend on what environment you create for that. So I've been in some and witnessed some fantastic analysis sessions that have been 40, 50 minutes, but they've been, like you suggested there, player involvement, a task. It might actually be like a fun activity. So I can remember working with our under 15 squad a few years ago, and we were trying to sort of instill some of the DNA principles within the players, and that was sort of staying on the ball and maintaining possession. And we had like flip charts with different numbers around the room, which reflected the possession we'd had in the game. And the players had to like move to the flip chart that they thought was the possession figure that we had. And that was just one small part of it. But constructing an environment like that compared to just sitting in a room and you listen to what I say are two completely different things. So when people say the session's been no longer than 15 minutes, I really challenge that, because I think that really depends on the environment that you create. But again, another point just to pick up on in terms of, I think I alluded to before, the players are the ones that cross that white line and play the game, and they're the ones that have to make the appropriate decisions at the right time and have the engagement and interaction with players. So the more opportunities we can give them off the field to practice that, and in the off-field environments is a massive opportunity to do that, the better I think we're going to prepare them for what they have to do on the field of play. Matty, anything you want to add from sort of a coach education domain or from some of the clubs and teams that you're in regularly with?
Yeah, I think the stuff that both the guys, particularly Lydia, what she just spoke about, is really powerful. If we're going to assume that off-field coaching is really important, and it is, and to make those connections with people, then if we were doing on-field coaching, we'd consider the types of interventions, and we need to make those same considerations if we're working off-field. So does everyone need to be involved in a big, long, whizzy analysis session? So it have to be everyone? Does it need to be the team? Is it units? Is it individuals? Is it peers? Is it about them? Is it about us? Is it position specific? So we can really start to hone in on the specific type of information that we want to use, because when we use analysis, we can look at every facet of the game. And I think if we then start to give some ownership back to the players about and get them to understand how this sits and fits, it's really essential for them, and it's a really good tool to help them to go and play the game. So the types of intervention, the way we break up and create that environment off field, is as important as what we do on field.
No, great stuff. And I think I just try and just bring to sort of a summary and to some of the things, I guess, for those of you listening in and watching, to maybe go away and reflect and think about is, I guess, in your own individual environments, how are you using analysis to either, help you in your individual coaching role, to help reflect on training or in game, and I guess to start thinking about what actually is the real valuable information that's going to help your players be the best that they can be. And then, as a result of that, how might you then supplement some of the work that you do with the players on the field of play with opportunities off the field of play? And, I know that Liz and Danks have spoken quite, clearly around the international environment, and accept that that's, quite unique. But you think about, in changing rooms, you've got that horseshoe probably shape that Lydia mentioned in terms of being able to engage and get your players speaking and start some of that connection work in that environment. It doesn't have to be, a separate classroom or analysis environment. We're certainly in a world right now where we're having to all be reliant on the online tools and technology, and there's plenty of those out there that can help sort of supplement or underpin some of that work, whether it is just sharing a video clips on WhatsApp and starting a conversation with the players that way. And I guess then the final one is, I think, we've just discussed it in a great bit of detail there, is considerations to the environment you're creating. What are some of the outcomes and the objectives of the sessions that you're going after? Therefore, what might the content need to be to help you reach that outcome, and what might be the environment that you set up, whether that's quite an informal coffee machine conversation, or that more informal sort of learning environment in a classroom. But I think plenty of great insight from the guys. So thank you very much from me to Matty to Aaron to Lydia for your contributions and engagement in the session, and plenty of things I think for everyone that listens in to go away and think about. Thank you very much.